On February 15th, 1962, Nadia Boulanger conducted the first of 4 subscription concerts with the New York Philharmonic. This was part of a series of concerts celebrating the opening of the then new Lincoln Center. The concerts had most certainly been arranged by Boulanger's dear friend, Leonard Bernstein. The program, as was usual with Boulanger, was carefully chosen. It emphasized 3 aspects of her career and was, in a way, a summation of that career: her teaching, her conducting, and her advocacy of music by her students, in this case Virgil Thompson, her sister Lily, and her teacher Gabrielle Foray. The program opened with Foray's Requiem, Opus 48. That was the first half. After that half, intermission, then the new version of Virgil Thompson's A Solemn Music was premiered, and then a series of psalms by Lily Boulanger. Now, our concert today does not exactly reproduce her program, but is rather an homage to that program, and also meant to be, in a way, a summation of her life as a musician, a great teacher, and a great advocate for the art of music. A Solemn Music by Virgil Thompson. Well, it was originally written in the late 40s for the Goldman Band, which would be more like what we would call a wind ensemble now. And it sums up in his career several aspects. One, with its harmonic language, using triads, his upbringing as a Baptist in Kansas City, Missouri. So you have that aspect, but also his career as a modernist, because he uses, as a framework, aspects of Schoenberg's 12-tone technique. For this concert, he had reorchestrated the work, and the reorchestration with the strings gives it a particular intimacy and warmth, and an even enhanced dignity. I have wondered whether the title, A Solemn Music, is an allusion to John Milton's poem At a Solemn Music, which begins, "Blessed pair of sirens, pledges of heaven's joy, sphere-born harmonious sisters, voice and verse." Now, Thompson was a highly literate man. He may have had this in the back of his mind. A Solemn Music was clearly very important to Thompson. It is dedicated to 2 major figures in his life. The first, Gertrude Stein, who was the librettist of his opera 4 Saints in 3 acts, and then the mother of us all, and the French artist Christian Bérard, who is best remembered today, and especially in America, for the sets and costumes that he designed for Jean Cocteau's film La Belle et la Bête, Beauty and the Beast. This is a dignified work, and it suited Boulanger perfectly. The next aspect of today's program is the music of Lily Boulanger. first work is Pour le funérailles d'un soldat, for the funeral rites of a soldier. This was written in August 1912. The orchestration was finished in January the next year, the year that she won the Prix de Rome. It is dedicated to her harmony teacher, Georges Caussade, who was preparing her for the competition for the Prix de Rome. It was like a preparing for the Olympics. And she got the gold medal. She won the Prix de Rome. The text, which is a very unusual text, was drawn from a verse drama by Alfred de Musset, the translation of which is the cup and the lip, as in the expression, which is also in French, there is many a slip twixt the cup and the lip. And this is for the funeral of the protagonist. The next work is Lily Boulanger's setting of Psalm 25. The earth is the Lord's. Toward the end of her life, she wrote a series of large choral and orchestral pieces that were settings of the Psalms. She finished this Psalm 25 in the Villa Medici during her stay there for the Prix de Rome. Shortly thereafter, because of the war, she and her mother, who was her chaperone, would have to go back to Paris. This wonderful psalm, while it is very much in Lily Boulanger's unique idiom, was still inspired by a work by Florent Schmidt, who had been their classmate in Foray's composition class at the Paris Conservatory. And it was his Psalm 47, which was done some years ago at the Bard Festival. And in 1906, Lily attended all the rehearsals, in part because her sister, Nadia, was playing the prominent organ part in Schmidt's work. This inspired Lily to do her own settings of the Psalms in her own manner. And this is a marvelous, short, exuberant, joyous example, written by a young woman who was already very sick. The last piece on this triptych of Boulanger works that we are featuring today is the Vieille Prière Bouddhique. The text is drawn from Buddhist scripture. It is the daily prayer for peace. It is remarkably serene, given that it was written as the war deepened and France was more and more engulfed, and the chances of her winning became remote. It was only almost at the last minute that, due to the intervention of American troops, the Allies triumphed over the Axis powers. The great musicologist Annegret Fauser has aptly characterized this piece as a prayer for peace for humanity. Lily Boulanger died on the 15th of March, 1918. 10 days later, Debussy died. The worst month in the history of French music. And finally, we come to Foray's Requiem. There is a lot written about the Requiem, which is speculative. But here is what we actually know. First of all, its full title is Messe de Requiem, Requiem Mass, Opus 48. This is an important distinction. because it was not written as a concert piece. It was written originally as a liturgical work. And why? Well, in 1877, Foray, who had just become the maître de chapelle, the director of the choir at the Grand Parisian Church, the Église de Sainte-Marie-Madeleine, sketched out a setting for baritone of the Liberame section of what we think of as the Requiem Mass. It's not, in fact. It's part of the Office of the Dead, which is performed after the Requiem Mass proper is completed. During the aspersion and incensation of the body. At the time, Foray was miserable. He had been jilted by his fiancée and was feeling really tragic. And that jilting, that wound, never really quite healed. So he goes through an unsettled decade. However, in 1887, he begins to write the work that we know as his Requiem today. And it wasn't because of the death of his parents. He wasn't close to his parents for very good reason. It was, in fact, for a very specific person, a famous architect in Paris named Joseph Le Souffachet, who was a Chevalier of the Legion of Honor and who was a noted architect privé, which meant that he built grand houses and renovated old chateaus, and in fact had renovated the Louvre, for which he was made a Chevalier of the Légion d'Honneur, Monsieur Le Souffachet. And he had a grand funeral at the Madeleine. Actually, it wasn't his funeral. I have to qualify that. It was a memorial Requiem Mass because Monsieur Le Souffachet had died exactly a year earlier, 16th January 1887. Now, Le Souffachet seems to have known Foray's father-in-law, the sculptor Emmanuel Fremier. For whatever reason, the Requiem was written under a deadline for this memorial Requiem Mass. And it was so much of a deadline that Foray finished the Sanctus on January 9th, which is very few days before the premiere, and in those days everything had to be copied by hand. Originally, Foray's Requiem was 5 movements. It was what he called the Petit Requiem, Introit et Kyrie, Sanctus, Pie Jesu, Agnus Dei, in Paradisum. Sometime between the premiere and 1893, Foray added the Offertoire, which is now in second place, and the 1877 Liberame, which he revised. Now, there is also the idea that Foray left out the Dies Irae because he didn't agree with the theology of it. This is incorrect. His Requiem is very precisely tailored to the idiosyncratic liturgy influenced by the history of the Gallican Church, the French Church, that was still in place at La Madeleine, as Parisians call it, in the 1880s. Now, his publisher found out and asked Foray to orchestrate the Requiem for full orchestra. It had been growing, its reputation, to the amazement of its composer, had been growing and growing, And finally, Monsieur Hamel, his publisher, said, please orchestrate it. Well, the thing is, he didn't. We're not sure who orchestrated Foray's Requiem. He may have done parts of it. He may have had his student Roger Ducasse do part of it. But in fact, we don't know. But this premiered at a most prestigious concert at the Universal Exposition in Paris in 1900. And it began to be performed in France and in Belgium regularly and in concert. It moved from the church and the liturgy to the concert hall. The original version sat on the shelves of the Madeleine for decades, and was finally published in the 1970s. Now, Nadia Boulanger was very close to Foray. He was her teacher, and one of her teachers. She also studied with Vidor. She also studied organ with Byron. But Foray had a special place in her pantheon of composers. She is a good reason, a good part of the reason why we know the Foray Requiem today. She conducted the British premiere in 1936 at Queen's Hall. It was a revelation. Of course, Foray had died in 1924. And then she performed the first performance over the BBC on February 27th, 1947, in a concert in memory of those members of the Free French Forces who had died. She also conducted it in 1938 with the Boston Symphony, the first woman to conduct at the Boston Symphony. And of course, this highly prestigious concert in 1962. Now, what can one say about the Requiem? It was not meant to be a grand choral fresco like Brahms' Ein Deutsches Requiem or Berlioz or Verdi. It was meant specifically for the parishioners at La Madeleine. I was able to look at the registries of the deceased, which from 1801 to 1905, the period of the Concordat, which was signed by Pope Pius VIII and Napoleon in 1801 and was enforced until 1905, all French churches had to keep detailed records of the Requiem masses they performed. Well, in 1888, the priests performed either low mass, a said mass, or sung mass, going right up to orchestral forces. They said 327 Requiem masses. The year before, it was 353. Now, the Madeleine is used for state funerals, so about 50 to 60 of those funerals were state occasions. The rest of them were parishioners or people associated with the church. This works out to about 6% of the church dying every year. And a hefty percent of those were children who died beginning in the winter. There were no antibiotics in those days and no science to rescue them from what must have seemed like a perpetual pandemic. What about Foray's aesthetics? Foray was a gentle, quiet, kindly man. In 1896, he became the organist titulaire, the head organist of the Madeleine. In an interview that was given to a young gentleman in 1902, Foray said, "I was sick of the kind of music done at Requiem masses in the Madeleine, and I wanted to provide something different." He did. Now, Foray was baptized a Roman Catholic, and he had a grand state funeral, but he was not dogmatic, to put it mildly. Because Foray believed in love. We know this because the French author Eugène Berthaud heard it from his own lips, that love was the most important thing to Foray. Foray said, "God is just an imposing synonym for love." The thing that makes the Requiem unique is this love, this caressing tenderness. Boulanger once compared Foray in his manner, his aesthetics, his religious beliefs, to gentle saints, St. John and St. Francis of Assisi. Now, Foray was no saint. However, there were saintly qualities. So, this Requiem, and for us now, it will be, for many of us especially, moving, was meant to console, was meant to be as if a kind and loving friend comes and offers us the consolation of beauty. I want to give Nadia Boulanger the last word. In a concert review, which I found in a book, beautifully translated by our own scholar-in-residence for this year, Janice Brooks and Kimberly Francis, this quotation that they have translated. And mind you, this is after Boulanger's sister dies in 1918. Nothing is better than music. When it takes us out of time, it has done more for us than we have the right to hope for. It has broadened the limits of our sorrowful life. It has lit up the sweetness of our hours of happiness by effacing the pettinesses that diminish us, bringing us back pure and new to what was, what will be, what music has created for us. Thank you.